Hello, this is Alan Brooks, and today we're going to be touching a very heady subject, a hard subject to many. Who is the Antichrist? Where will he come from? You know, when I was growing up, I heard Henry Kissinger was the Antichrist, and we've all heard today how the Pope is the Antichrist, the Vatican is evil, or we've heard Barack Obama is the Antichrist, or any other notable political figure from Europe or from the United States. So why do people think that? It's because there's a prophecy in Daniel 8. It talks about how Alexander the Great's kingdom was divided into four parts, and out of one of them came the Antichrist. Let's go to Daniel 8, verse 8. Therefore the male goat, or Alexander the Great, grew very great, but when he became strong, the large horn was broken, and in its place of it, four notable ones came up towards the four winds of heaven. Verse 9, and out of one of them, or out of one of the four quadrants of his kingdom, Alexander the Great's kingdom, a little horn grew exceedingly great towards the south, towards the east, and towards the glorious land. And it grew up to the host of heaven, and cast down some of the host and some of the stars to the ground, and trampled them. And even verse 11, it goes, he even exalted himself as high as the prince of hosts, and by him the daily sacrifices were taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. Okay, so what does all this mean? Well, first of all, most people have said that Rome, the Antichrist, will come from Rome, and this is why Alexander the Great led Rome. But it actually says the kingdom was divided into four parts, and out of one of them the Antichrist will arise. Well, in history, in historical fact, Daniel was accurate. Alexander the Great's kingdom was divided up into four parts, and four generals took them over. The first kingdom was Macedonia, and Antigonus took that over. Asia Minor was the other kingdom, and Lashmaskus, however you pronounce that, I don't know, took that part over. And the third part of his kingdom was Syria and Seleucus. And the fourth part was Egypt, and Ptolemy took that over. So you have four generals that took over the divided kingdom of Alexander the Great. And out of one of these places came the Antichrist. So do we have a clue as to what kingdom and where he will come from? Well, if we read in verse 9, it goes, and out of one of these four places, out of one of them, came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the glorious land. What does this mean? It means he grows towards the east, and the opposite of east would be west, and that would be where Israel is, or the glorious land. So we can infer from this that he will arise east of Israel, as the glorious land, Israel, is west. Therefore, that would logically deduce from all that he cannot arise in Europe, which is west, or the United States, which is west. He has to arise in Asia Minor, which is to the northeast of Israel. And in fact, that is the entire Bible's pattern about the end of time, that this Antichrist will arise northeast of Israel, or Asia Minor, as it says here. At the end of time, it actually identifies the king of the north as being the Antichrist. If we start reading in verse 29, it says, at the appointed time, he, the king of the north, shall return and go after the south. But it shall not be like the former of the latter times. Here it speaks of the battles at the first part of Daniel 11. For the ships from Cyprus will come against him. Therefore he'll be grieved and return in a rage against the holy covenant and do damage. What does this mean? It means he's going to attack the south. And the singular pattern of the end of time throughout the entire Bible is that this king of the north, or the Antichrist, will sweep through the southern kingdoms of Iraq and Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and North Africa. And why does this make sense in today's reality, you might ask? Well, the king of the north would basically be around Iran and Russia. I know a lot of people today say that the Antichrist will arise in Turkey. Sure, that's possible, but I believe it's more likely that he's going to be Russian, as in the Prince of Rosh, as one translation says about Ezekiel 38. That's who I believe the Antichrist is, Gog. He's the Prince of Rosh. He will sweep down through as a Shia Muslim, and that's exactly what the Shias want to do. They want to attack the Sunni states of Iraq and Saudi Arabia. In fact, they hate Saudi Arabia. That's one of the classically known things about Islam of today, is that the Shia Muslims hate the Sunnis. And in fact, Donald Trump even said Iran wants to invade Saudi Arabia, which when I heard that, my jaw dropped, because that is exactly what the Bible predicts. It says this in Isaiah 13. It goes, the kings of the Medes, which is Iran, will want to invade Babylon, which is Iraq and Saudi Arabia, and that'll begin the day of the Lord, which starts the last 3.5 years of time. So anyway, getting back to Daniel 11, it's about the kings of the north, and it says that 31, and forces shall be mustered by him, and he shall defile the sanctuary fortress. Then they shall take away the daily sacrifices, and there make up the abomination of desolation. So what does that mean, the abomination of desolation? Well, all throughout the Bible, in Daniel about 5 times, and in the book of Revelation several times, and Jesus said it in all 4 Gospels, there's going to be a point in time that starts the last 3.5 years before the second coming of Christ. What starts this point is the abomination of desolation. That is, when this Antichrist, this northern king, sweeps through the southern kingdoms, and then in a surprise, he attacks Israel. And when he does, he's going to come in and march into the temple, which the Israel wants to rebuild, and stop the renewed sacrifices. That's what it says several times. Many times it says the same thing, that he will take away the daily sacrifice and set up the abomination of desolation. Now, what does this code word mean, the abomination of desolation? It means that the Antichrist is somehow going to say, I am God, I am your Messiah, and Jesus is not, and these sacrifices mean nothing, so I'm going to take over Israel, and I'm going to be the Muslim Messiah and make a caliphate of the entire Middle East, a Shia caliphate, which is really amazing because that's exactly what they want to do. In verse 36 in Daniel 11, it says, the king shall do according to his own will. He shall exalt and magnify himself above every god. He shall speak blasphemies against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the wrath has been accomplished, and what has been determined shall be done. And he shall regard neither the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, which some people think that means he's gay, nor any god, but shall exalt himself above them all. Now, isn't that amazing? That's exactly what the Antichrist will be, someone who will regard no other gods, but exalts himself over them all. And then at the time of the end, verse 40, it says, the king of the south shall attack him, but the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots, horsemen, and many ships. And he shall enter all these countries, overwhelm them, and pass through them. In verse 41, then he shall enter the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown. So I want you to first notice something here in Daniel 11, that it makes a statement about what this guy's going to do, the Antichrist, how he's going to sweep through the south, the southern nations, and then he's going to set up the abomination. And then he repeats that same prophecy. And I found that after 30 years of study in the Old Testament, that's what these prophet dudes say. They repeat the same predictions again and again. So that's where we get messed up. We think that this is a new prediction, like, say, starting in verse 40, but it's not. It's just a repeat of verses 29 through 39. So he states the prophecy in verses 29 through 39, and the verses 40 through 45, he repeats it. And so it's a kind of a simple thing that people don't notice. And if you look throughout the entire Bible, in fact, the book of Daniel is basically the same prophecy about the same time, the last 3.5 years, and he repeats the same prophecy over and over again. And what is that prophecy? It's, you see the Antichrist invade Israel, you need to get out of town because he's going to stop the sacrifice. This is what Jesus said as well in Matthew 24. He goes, when you see this abomination spoken of by Daniel, and here we see what Daniel was talking about, how this arrogant, evil Antichrist from Asia Minor or from northeast of Israel will sweep through the Middle East, and then he'll pretend like he's coming back home, and then in a surprise, he will attack Israel, and he'll set up the abomination. And so this is how the Bible speaks. They say the same prophecies over and over again. I found that like Isaiah, for example, repeats the same prophecy about the same time, the last 3.5 years, maybe 35, 40 times. Now, isn't that crazy? But that's what I've found. And the pattern that we see over and over again is a northern Antichrist kingdom, a coalition of nations like Ezekiel 38 will sweep through the Middle East and attack Saudi Arabia. That's what Isaiah 21 says. This northern kingdom led by Iran and others, and the Antichrist, whoever he's going to be, either from Iran or Russia, even from Turkey, as many say today, that he's going to sweep through the Middle East and then pretend like he's coming back home, and then a surprise, he's going to attack Israel, who's living in peace. Now, why would Israel think that they're in peace at the end of time? It says so, and Paul said it in 1 Thessalonians 5. He said that when they say peace and safety, sudden destruction will come upon them as labor pains upon a pregnant woman. So, destruction where? Israel. We see that constant theme throughout Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and almost every Old Testament book. It says, at the end of time, on the day of the Lord, Israel will be living in a false peace because of a bad peace treaty. Now, where is that peace treaty, you might ask? Well, Daniel also has that, as amazing as it might seem. It says in Daniel 9:27, it talks about this peace treaty that the Antichrist will make. It says he will confirm a covenant with many for 1 7-year period. And in the middle of that 7-year period, or what is commonly known today as the tribulation, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering, and at the temple he will set up the abomination that causes desolation. So, isn't that the same phrase we just heard in Daniel 11? And in Daniel 8, it talks about that same thing, this Antichrist from the north of Israel, sweeping down into Israel and setting up this abomination and stopping the sacrifice. In fact, my theory as to why is that Israel will start sacrificing again when God has already given his only son. You see how that works? In all these places it talks about the Antichrist being sent by God. Isaiah 10, he's sent by God as a punishment against his own people. Luke 21, this is the time of wrath against God's own people. And hey, I'm not against Israel. I love Israel. I'm just telling you what the Bible says is going to happen. The first thing this Antichrist from the north does is stop the sacrificing. And then he proclaims himself God in an act called the abomination of desolation. Jesus talked about that in Matthew 24:15 and 16. He goes, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel, which we've just been talking about here, flee, Israel, flee out of town. Why? Because Jesus said that even pregnant women will have to worry. Why would they have to worry? Well, Muslims will cut open even pregnant women, and we've seen that in ISIS. They have actually done that in the Middle East. They've cut open pregnant women. And in Hosea, it says the same thing, Hosea 13. It talks about the Antichrist kingdom coming into Israel, and the pregnant woman will be ripped open. Now, is the Bible relevant for today's headlines? Yes, it is, because Muslims will want to do that. And what else will Muslims want to do? They cut off heads. Revelation talks about the Antichrist, the Christians who have been killed by having their heads cut off. And so people like to theorize that the Antichrist is the Pope. Well, I highly doubt that the Pope or Catholic Church would cut off heads. Islam would, however. And who wants to invade Israel today? Islam, not the Catholic Church. So I don't think it's the Pope. I mean, he could be the false prophet. I grant you that. But over and over, the Bible has one story about the Antichrist. He will come into Israel, he will stop the sacrifices, and he will proclaim himself God in an event called the Abomination. And then he will rule for 3.5 years, and then Jesus Christ comes back and destroys him. And he's an Assyrian, which is basically the same area northeast of Israel. Isaiah 10 talks about the Assyrian Antichrist coming in as a punishment against his people. And then it says in Isaiah 14, when Jesus comes back, I will destroy the Assyrian in my land. And in a confirmation, a startling confirmation, Joel 2:20 says, when Jesus Christ comes back, he goes, I will cast out the northern army out of Israel. So those are two mighty confirming things about what I believe, that the Antichrist is from north. Joel 2:20 says, I will cast out the northern army, not the army from the Vatican or the United States. And then he goes, Isaiah 14, I will destroy the Assyrian in my land. And Assyria is northeast, ancient Assyria of Israel. So we see this pattern all throughout Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, that a coalition of northern Shia Muslim nations will sweep down and attack Saudi Arabia. Isaiah 21 even says Saudi Arabia. It says that Babylon is fallen, which is exactly what Revelation says. 14, Babylon is fallen, which means, people, that the Babylon that is fallen is not New York City, the whore. It is actually Saudi Arabia. Now think about it. Who has spread Wahhabi Islam all over the world? Who has spread the Islamic thinking to kill Christians, the blood of the saints? It is Saudi Arabia, and they are thus the whore of Babylon according to Isaiah 21. Look it up. So again, Daniel 11, Daniel 9, and Daniel 8 speak of a northern Antichrist making a peace treaty, and then in the middle of that peace treaty, they sweep down and they attack the kings of the south, which is Egypt and Saudi Arabia and Iraq, and then they pretend like they're going back home, and they attack Israel, and he sets up the abomination. So Ezekiel 38 says the same thing. It says, Gog, the one all the prophets have spoken of, on the day of the Lord, during peace, he will sweep down from the north and attack the lower nations, and then it says he will turn up back to Israel. So he sweeps down to the south and then back up. So that's this consistent pattern of the scriptures, that the Shia Antichrist and his armies are going to sweep through the Middle East to set up a Shia caliphate, and then they're going to turn back up. And then I think Ezekiel 21 says he stops at the fork of the road and says, what should I do? Should I go back home? Should I go after Jordan? What should I do? Should I go into Israel? It says he cast lots. He looks at the feathers. He looks at the tea leaves. And he goes, now I'm going to attack Israel. So that's why Israel's surprised by all this. That's why Paul said that the day of the Lord happens when people say peace, and Israel will be completely surprised because it'll look like the Shia army is trying to set up a caliphate and they're not going to attack Israel. But in fact, they will at the last second. He's going to move over and attack Israel in a surprise, which is why it says Israel will be living in a false peace. Ezekiel 38, when people say peace and safety, Israel will be living in peace, it says, in a false peace. In so many scriptures, it's not even funny. I list them in my new book that's coming out, The Sequence of the End of Time, how Jeremiah 1 through 4, how Jeremiah 6 through 8, how Ezekiel 38, how Isaiah over and over, Isaiah 28, it says Israel make a covenant, a bad peace treaty, a covenant with death, and then they'll be attacked by this army from the north. So we have here a lot of proof that just these verses alone, that the Antichrist will not be from Europe, he will not be from the Vatican, he will not be from the USA. He will in fact be from around Iran or Russia, the Prince of Rosh, as Ezekiel 38 says. So a lot of people go, well, how could that be Ezekiel 38? Well, how could that be the Antichrist? Because what you have to realize about the end time scriptures is not all of them say every single detail about the end of time, but we know that there's going to be one last 3.5 year period, or the second half of the last tribulation, right? And that last 3.5 years is going to start with an invasion of Israel by this Antichrist character. But all these prophets, they didn't actually put in that last 3.5 years. They may not have even known about it, but we know about it, and so we have to add it in. We have to say, at the end of, let's say, Ezekiel 38 and 39, what's the story? During peace, a northern coalition of nations will come down into the Middle East and then go back up and attack Israel, who's in peace, it says. And then it says that like Armageddon happens in Ezekiel 39. It says the birds will feast on the armies, which is direct quotes from the book of Revelation about Armageddon. So it looks like when you just read Ezekiel 38 and 39 that Israel's attacked and then the Lord comes back at Armageddon. But we know that's not what's going to happen. We know that there's going to be a 3.5 year period where the Antichrist reigns from Israel, where the Gentiles trample Israel. It says that in Revelation 11, too. It says the Gentiles will trample Jerusalem for 42 months. Luke 21 says the same thing, actually. It says Jerusalem will be trampled, the same word as Revelation 11, until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. And it says in Revelation 13, this Antichrist character rules for 3.5 years. He's like a lion, a leopard, and a bear. Now, those kingdoms are like Medo-Persia, they're like Russia, a bear, and they're like Assyria. So you can see how the same picture is presented throughout the whole Bible, which is another crazy theory I have, is that the entire Old Testament, prophetic Old Testament, is about one thing, this last 3.5 years of time. It's where a northern coalition of nations come down and attacks the southern nations of the Middle East. It even lists the nations in Isaiah 15 through 21. It says, nation by nation, Syria, Jordan, Egypt, North Africa, and the last nation on their stop is Saudi Arabia, the whore of Babylon. And then the next nation to be invaded in Isaiah 22 is Israel. So you can see it's a pet theory of mine, a pet phrase I've made up, which is the Lord, with the Lord's help, that the same God uses the same words and phrases to describe the same future events in the same Bible. And in this case, the same events are that a northern Antichrist from northeast of Israel, probably from Russia, maybe from Iran or areas therein, will sweep down and attack the lower Middle East and then turn back up like they're going back home. And then in a surprise, they attack Israel living in peace, who's not expecting this. And then Israel will be forced to make a decision. Do we fight? If these armies have nukes, what do we do? Do we surrender? Do we nuke everybody? And at that point, Israel won't know what to do. And this is why Jesus says, when you see Luke 21, Jerusalem surrounded by armies, Israel, flee, get out of town. And that's another code word at the end of time. All these scriptures in Daniel, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, Isaiah, they all say the same thing, that on the day of the Lord, Israel must flee to the mountains. So who's going to help them flee? Is it going to be Europe? No, with Europe turning more Muslim every day, who's going to be helping them flee? Is it going to be South America? No, it's going to be America, like the airlift in John Kennedy's day of the people of Berlin. America's going to airlift Israel to safety, I believe. I mean, most people think Israel's going to flee to Petra, which is possible. But it says in Revelation 12 that during this last 3.5 years, the two wings of a great eagle will fly Israel to safety for 3.5 years to a wilderness, a place in the wilderness. So America is most likely represented as two wings of a great eagle, and when this Antichrist character swoops down and invades a peaceful Israel, the two wings of a great eagle are going to sweep Israel out, going to airlift them out back to the United States, where the Antichrist, where the devil can't get at them. Revelation 12 even says that. They're flown to the wilderness, where a place of safety where the Antichrist can't get them. The only place that I could think of that could be would be the United States. And the only country that I know would be represented by two wings of a great eagle, the United States is the eagle nation. So there you have it, folks. Will the Antichrist be Henry Kissinger, Barack Obama, or some United States president, or some European leader? No. Will he be the Pope? No. He will be a Muslim from northeast of Israel. It says that everywhere in the Bible. He will be an Assyrian. He will come down and attack the Middle East. Then he, in a surprise, will attack an Israel living in peace and safety. This is Alan Brooks. If you want to email me with any questions at all, my email is abrook, no S, the number 8 at AOL.com.